August 1944. The Allied armies are closing in on Paris. In his command bunker deep in East Prussia, Adolf Hitler issues one of the most nihilistic orders in history. If he cannot have Paris, then no one will. He commands his newly appointed governor of the city to turn the most beautiful city in the world into a field of rubble. The bridges are to be blown, the landmarks demolished. The city is to be burned to the ground. The man charged with this monstrous task is a German general, known for his brutal efficiency and unwavering obedience. But in the final hours, as fuses were being laid and detonators prepared, he would be faced with a choice: obey his Fuhrer and become the destroyer of Paris, or commit an act of high treason that would save the city, but could cost him and his entire family their lives. To understand the order, we must first understand the mind of the man who gave it. By August 1944, Adolf Hitler was a cornered animal. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet war machine was relentlessly pushing west. On the Western Front, the D-Day landings had been a success, and 1 million Allied soldiers were now smashing their way through France. Just a month earlier, he had survived the July 20th assassination attempt, when his own officers tried to kill him with a bomb. He was now consumed by paranoia and a thirst for apocalyptic vengeance. In Hitler's mind, retreat was the ultimate sin. He had declared that all major cities were to become fortresses, to be defended to the last man and the last bullet. If a city could not be held, it was to be destroyed utterly, leaving nothing for the enemy but scorched earth. This was his Nero decree, a policy of total destruction. He had already done it on the Eastern Front in cities like Warsaw and Minsk, leaving behind a wasteland. Now, his rage-filled eyes turned to Paris. In a frantic telephone call to his high command, Hitler's voice was a shriek of fury. He demanded that the city be turned into a pile of rubble. He ordered that the 32 bridges over the River Seine be wired for demolition, that the historical landmarks be mined, and that the city's infrastructure, its power plants, its waterworks, its telephone exchanges, be systematically obliterated. He screamed into the phone, "The city must not fall into the enemy's hand except lying in a field of rubble." And to ensure this order was carried out, he chose a man he believed to be as ruthless and obedient as himself. General Dietrich von Choltitz was a soldier's soldier. He was a third-generation Prussian officer, bred for war and obedience. His entire life was defined by duty, discipline, and loyalty to the chain of command. He was not a political Nazi ideologue, but his service record was brutal. He had earned a reputation as a specialist in scorched earth tactics. In 1940, in Rotterdam, his forces had carried out a bombing campaign that flattened the city centre. On the Eastern Front, he had participated in the brutal siege of Sevastopol, a battle of such ferocity that it left the city a ghost town. He followed orders, no matter how harsh. This efficiency earned him the nickname the Destroyer. So when Hitler summoned Choltitz to his bunker on August 7, 1944, he believed he had found the perfect man for the job. In their face-to-face meeting, Hitler personally appointed Choltitz as the new military governor of Paris. Choltitz later described the Fuhrer as a broken man, stooped, trembling, with a mad gleam in his eyes. Hitler gave him his personal verbal order: defend Paris to the last man, and if it cannot be held, destroy it completely. Choltitz listened, clicked his heels, and said, "Mein Führer, I obey." But on the long journey to Paris, something began to shift in the general's mind. He was a student of history. He understood what Paris meant, not just to France, but to the world. He was a soldier, but he was not a vandal. He was also a pragmatist. He knew the war was lost. To destroy Paris would be a final, meaningless act of barbarism that would stain the honor of the German army forever. For the first time in his life, the General of Destruction began to contemplate an act of creation, the preservation of a city. He was walking into a trap, caught between his Fuhrer's insane order and his own burgeoning conscience. When General von Choltitz arrived in Paris on August 9th, he set up his headquarters in the lavish Hotel Meurice, with a balcony overlooking the Tuileries garden. And Paris began to work its magic on him. The city was an open-air museum, a masterpiece of human culture. It was the home of art, philosophy, and romance. Even under German occupation, the city had a life and beauty that defied the grim reality of war. From his balcony, he could see the Eiffel Tower, the Louvre, the Place de la Concorde. He understood that these were not just buildings, they were monuments to civilization. To destroy them would be like burning the Mona Lisa or smashing the Venus de Milo. It would be a crime against history itself. But his orders were clear. He was a good soldier, and good soldiers prepare. He summoned his chief engineer, Captain Werner Ebernach, and began the grim task of wiring Paris for destruction. Tons of explosives were systematically placed. The famous bridges, the Pont Neuf, the Pont Alexandre III, were packed with demolition charges. Mines were laid in the basements of the National Assembly, the Foreign Ministry, and even, it was rumoured, Notre Dame Cathedral itself. Detonators were connected to a central command post in his hotel. All it would take was a single phone call, a single command from Choltitz to erase 1,000 years of history. As Choltitz prepared for destruction, other forces were working towards salvation. The most important of these was the Swedish consul general in Paris, Raoul Nordling. As a neutral diplomat, Nordling could move between the German authorities and the burgeoning French resistance. He was a master of quiet diplomacy, a man who understood how to appeal to reason and honor. He managed to secure a meeting with General von Choltitz at the Hotel Meurice. Their conversations were a high-stakes chess match. Nordling didn't demand or threaten. Instead, he appealed to Choltitz's sense of history and his legacy. He asked him, "Do you want to be remembered for all time as the man who destroyed Paris?" He spoke of the future, of the inevitable post-war world, and how this one act would define Germany's place in it. He also made a very pragmatic argument. He pointed out that a peaceful surrender of the city would save thousands of lives, both German and French. At the same time, the French resistance within Paris was growing bolder. Led by Henri Roll-Tanguy, the communist head of the FFI, French forces of the interior, they began to openly fight the German garrison. Barricades, reminiscent of the French Revolution, started appearing in the streets. This put Choltitz in an even more difficult position. The uprising gave him a reason to tell Hitler that he was engaged in a fierce battle and couldn't carry out the demolitions yet. It was a delay tactic. Choltitz began a dangerous double game. To his superiors in Berlin, he reported heavy fighting and exaggerated the strength of the resistance, buying himself precious time. To the resistance, through intermediaries like Nordling, he agreed to a temporary truce, secretly hoping to avoid an all-out battle that would force his hand. He was walking a tightrope over a volcano. He even made a secret agreement with Nordling to release thousands of political prisoners, a clear act of defiance against SS policy. But Hitler was not a fool. He grew suspicious of the delays. The phone calls from his bunker became more frequent, more frantic. He personally called Choltitz, his voice a deranged scream, demanding to know if his orders were being carried out. The climax of these calls was his now infamous, terrifying question, repeated over and over. "Brennt Paris? Is Paris burning?" On the evening of August 24th, the Allies made their move. Hitler had wanted to deny the French the honour of liberating their own capital, but the Allied command relented. The Free French 2nd Armoured Division raced towards the city. That night, the bells of Notre Dame, silent for 4 years of occupation, began to ring out across the city, announcing that liberation was at hand. For General von Choltitz, this was the moment of truth. The final desperate calls from Hitler's bunker were coming in, demanding that he unleash the inferno. The detonators were live. His engineers were waiting for the code word. He held the fate of the most beautiful city on earth in his hands. He could obey his Fuhrer, a man he now knew to be insane, and commit a historical atrocity. Or he could disobey, save the city, and face the consequences, which, under the Nazi Sippenhaft laws, meant not only his own execution, but the arrest and potential execution of his wife and children back in Germany. The phone from Berlin rang again. Choltitz picked it up, listened to the hysterical demands from his superiors, and calmly replied that he needed more time. He put the phone down. He looked at the other phone, the one that would have given the order to destroy, and he never picked it up. In that moment of quiet defiance, Dietrich von Choltitz, the destroyer, became the saviour of Paris. He chose history over hysteria. He chose civilization over chaos. On the morning of August 25th, 1945, soldiers of the Free French Division stormed the Hotel Meurice. They found General von Choltitz in his full-dress uniform, waiting to surrender. He was taken into custody, and the German garrison of Paris formally capitulated. The explosives were never detonated. The bridges remained standing. Paris was saved. Dietrich von Choltitz remained a prisoner of war until 1947. He was never charged with war crimes for his actions in Paris. In a stroke of luck, his family was not harmed by the collapsing Nazi regime in its final chaotic days. He lived until 1966, a controversial figure to the end. Some saw him as a lifelong brutal soldier who only acted out of self-preservation, knowing the war was lost. Others, especially the people of Paris, saw him as a man who, at the most critical moment, rediscovered his conscience. The truth may be complex, but the result is undeniable. The City of Light was not extinguished. The bridges still stand. The Louvre still holds its treasures. Notre Dame, though later scarred by a different kind of fire, survived the deliberate malice of war. This enduring beauty is, in part, the legacy of a single, disobedient soldier. An ember of reason that refused to be stamped out by the madness of a dying regime, reminding us that sometimes the greatest act of courage is not to fight, but to refuse to destroy.